To appreciate just how good this game is, we need to remind ourselves how strong Hikaru is at chess. Now this is classical chess, the slow time control. He's world number 3. We go to rapid. He's a top 10 player in the world. Blitz, he's top 3 in the world here. His opponent in this game, Hans Niemann, let's switch to it. He's way down those lists. I mean, yes, he's strong, 2700 club, but he shouldn't be at this level. And yet, what he does to Hikaru here is insane. Outplays him and then some. So the opening starts kind of normal. We get a Gucci Reza piano, named after the fashion icon of chess himself. Now this bishop develops. I love what we see in a minute. Knight f6. Do we get some pawn action there? No. Some knight action sets up that massive Jenga tower down the c-file. Hikaru unlocks himself dinner for 2 with Danny Wrench. Lucky guy. And after a6, now the pony hops into the center. h6, bishop e3 offers a change of structure. You can go for it, different game. You gain some control of this square, open file, blah, blah, blah. Not done. d6 instead. Now we see the captures. Niemann happy to play this pawn structure. He gets the dark squared grip. Hikaru's got the light squared grip, but he doesn't castle, pawn c3. He completely forgets which way his pieces are supposed to move. Looks so weird, but does stop this bishop g4 idea now and keeps pieces on the board. Strong players love to do that, try and outmaneuver the weaker opponent as Hikaru sees hands. But watch out, there's something wicked on the way by this young man. We get castles, no king safety fist bump as some elite grandmasters do and explode it out. These guys, there's no love lost, a lot of history there. And after rook e8, a4, a5 could be on the way, so pawn b6. And now if you push on, you're prepared to pass like ships in the night, right? So no a5, h3 instead, and rook b8, uncompromising, searching for the pawn break. But watch what happens to Niemann now. After Hikaru looks to thrust in the center, the queen's developed to better squares, g6, rook a d1 blasting. Something like king g7 is prudent. Good prophylactic chess, come off this bishop's gaze. But Hans plays the immediate pawn b5 and it gets the double question marks of doom. Now, why am I singing the praises of a guy who's just blundered on move 15? Well, watch how he recovers. This is pretty special because after Hikaru plays the excellent, can you find the tactical shot? Do pause if you want to look. It was in the thumbnail, kind of gave it away. Bishop takes on b5. We see the tactical point after rook recaptures and d4 for the score. You open the queen on the unprotected rook. Big problem, because if you save that rook, now you take on e5, and the problem is you've opened up the gaze of the rook as well as forking these two pieces. Pawn's defended, so the queen can't take. You know what to do. Your queen is about to die, so something like this would be needed. The knight drops. Black is clearly worse here. You know what? Queen takes here or queen takes here. Doesn't matter. You're significantly worse. And there's not really much imbalance in the position to speak of. Therefore, difficult to drum up chances. So Niemann instead takes the pawn in the center, sacrifices the rook. When the smoke clears after rook takes on e4, we see that he's got an extra pawn for his exchange down. You know, he's given a rook for a bishop, but he does at least have some imbalance in the position. You know, there's this centralized pawn that needs to be dealt with. So Hikaru first hops here, hits the queen. No time to Botez gambit, so Hans centralizes. Now we see takes. Pawn recaptures. I mean, you could take with the knight, doesn't matter. Then white takes with the knight, pawn takes. The queens are leaving the board. You can't avoid it, basically. And now Hikaru should immediately play Chewbacca's favorite move, the Wookiee one, but he doesn't. Drops back with the knight to d2 here. I mean, you can see him deep calculating right at this moment.
c4, e4, d1, h5, d2, h5, d2, h5, d2, h5, d2, h5, d2, c5, h5, d5, e1, e1.
But it isn't quite the way to go because it encourages the rook in here. Then we see him play Chewie's favourite move, but there's a big difference. The pawn now advances into d3 and it's a real bone in the throat, which Hikaru only makes worse here. His best move is knight b1. Looks weird, but you spin around to c3 and you open up the rook to attack. Okay, different game. The bishop can always defend, right? There's knight f4 ideas as well, etc. Hans does have play with this passed pawn, but in the game, we see Hikaru take the rook. Pawn recaptures. Don't sacrifice your own rook here. That wouldn't be a good idea. So rook c1, and it's huge counterplay after knight b4. You know, all these pieces now protecting each other. Pawns covered, bishop's on the way, and this monster on e2, it lives, it breathes fire, right? How do you round it up as white? Hikaru goes knight e1, covering this sensitive d3 square, bishop a6, eyeballs the pawn, and this whole light squared complex. Now knight b3, we see king f8, knight c5, spawning the seahorsey, but the bishop simply saves itself, and Hikaru really struggles to go after this pawn. g3 is apparently best, maybe with the idea of bringing the king around. I didn't click that deep, but f3 isn't actually good. Excuse me. Because even though you give the king a square, after this knight hops in, excellent move. If you now go for king f2, does knight d1 check? You can't carry on your way out. The pawn is covered. You can't step back. You know, where are you going? G1, G3. And this is one of the problems, is that black's got this quite simple but deadly plan of just snaking the king all the way in. This kind of stuff's actually covered. These are protected. What is white doing here? Paralyzed. So we come back to the game. We see b3 from Hikaru. Knight d1 now played, hitting the back rank or first rank of white, cutting the king. Rook a1, king e7, rook a7, but the king defends just in time. This knight checks, king c6, and now Hikaru plays a series of 3 mistake moves, the engine calls it. Not on his best chess this game. He drops back to f2 here, attacks this one. Not that you're ever threatening to actually take right now. The queen would be born. So f5 is played, rook a8 from Hikaru, knight e3 now, and after rook a1, careering back into the game, we really see the paralysis of Hikaru. He's just struggling for a plan. You know, he doesn't even go after these pawns. What if he had, okay, this knight, what is it, knight e to c2 is best apparently, not this one, and you're attacking of course the defender of this square. The king can't get close. If knight d3, it drops. Okay, these are the big problems. You're overwhelmed. So the rook had to come and do some defense. Now we see king d5 though, rook c1, pawn to c ships. Black's got all bases covered. In marches the king. It's an attacking piece in the endgame. h4 now played here, king d4, g3 on the board, and Niemann has just got Hikaru by the kahunas. You can play what you want here. Waiting pawn moves, jump with the knight to a2. In the game though, he gives Hikaru a lifeline, doesn't play precisely. He should slow play the position, but he jumps with this knight to c2, preparing to bring in the king, but it allows this. Bang, Hikaru gives back the exchange. He was forced to do so due to the overwhelming paralysis that he was in, and now after this line, hitting the knight again, now we see this exchange of prisoners after the pawn is pushed through, the knight takes, king recaptures, and we're in a level endgame, pawns and minor piece, but this king now marches over to the b pawn and Hikaru has to tread so carefully. Plus they're low on time of course. Now the big problem here after knight f4 and king takes on b3, knight takes here, c5, is that your path to drawing this game is extremely narrow. You have to actually do something like king e3, and after the pawn pushes, knight f4, pawn c3 looks terminal because how does the knight get over? You just get chopped. But here's the tricky step that you have to take. You actually go in the complete opposite direction to spin back around if black pushes, land the check, pick up the pawn, and then of course white marches in. You munch pawns, you push your own. It should be a drawn game. So black wouldn't push here, king b2, but then knight d4 anyway. You wait, you push your own pawns. Crazy position. That was the way to go. Something like this. But Hikaru goes g4, going for the kind of energetic pawn push move move. However, this c-pawn is fast. It's like a donkey on roller skates. We get takes on f5. I don't know what that is, I just said. We get pawn f6 here. Bishop c4, covering the advance of it, of course, down here. And now after knight f4, c2, this one has to spin back and pick up the pawn, but of course you can take. Now Hikaru's seen this. The queen is made in just a moment, but he makes one of his own. This is his glimmer of hope. But let's not forget now, Hans has a complete extra bishop. He now saves it. We see this series of moves here. The queen gives the check, king g3. Lots of checks now. You know, you often get this, especially in time scrambles. Both players trying to pick up time. They get in a few extra seconds of move. Now we see another check. And long story short, Hans just does this brilliant job of marching the king all the way over to the king side, back with its pawn and its pieces. And this one's under fire. Not long for this world. This is how the game proceeds. And the pawn drops after a check and also keeps the bishop defended. That is huge because now this one is running. We get a few more checks, but they're blocked off. Some counter checks. This is how the game proceeded, and somewhere around here Hikaru's realizing the writing's on the wall. Hans doing a great job here. He's top 3 now, Blitz chess leaderboard on chess.com, and it's here on move 90 we see resignation from Hikaru Nakamura. Why?
Mushrooms.
Because the king can go somewhere. What was the line I was looking at? Say king g5, and you can do some more checks, but you're ultimately just driving the king in. You can munch a pawn, which opens the bishop. Apparently this weird queen f6 is the fastest checkmate. Here's one sample line and it ends the game on the spot. This was the final position. That was truly an exceptional game from Hans Niemann. Up against it and he turned it around. Hope you enjoyed this one. Do smash subscribe if you did, and have a look at the video on screen for another epic game of chess. Cheers.